All right. Is China's economic gold real gold or fool's gold? And what does it mean? I think it's a really important time to understand we're going through an economic almost chaos, and China's and the US and Europe are in this time of trying to determine the new economic reality of what's going on. And I think China's approach is one that's really worth looking at. And what does it really mean for worldwide investments, and especially for the US stock market? There were recently visits by venture capitalists and CEOs were so impressed by what they saw. The question is it real? Is it really real? But I want to go back and start by talking about something that's called the Potemkin Village. In 1787, Catherine the Great began her royal time in Russia. That was Catherine the Great. She had Gregory Potemkin, who was a field marshal. He was also Catherine's lover, and he was a diplomat. And on the occasion of taking possession of Crimea, the same Crimea we read about today, that's in the Ukrainian war, he wanted to impress allies of Russia because they were about to go to war with the Ottoman Empire. And they invited foreign dignitaries to make a trip with Catherine the Great. And what Potemkin did, because Russia was backward, it was poor, but he wanted to give the impression that Russia was prosperous. And so he built a village. He put up storefronts, just storefronts. You don't have to build the entire store, just put up storefronts, build facades, and make a village that looked prosperous. And he had his soldiers dress as peasants for the illusion. And he gave the illusion to make his allies join them in the war against the Ottoman Empire. And thus was born this idea of the Potemkin Village. It's a metaphor. Things that look elaborate, that look impressive, that have no substance, they're fake. And so is that what we're beginning to see in China? Well, let's look at it. In 2017, the Chinese top government officials gather for a session in which they plan and make a plan going forward. And it's usually a plan that's a 5-year plan. They're in the process of doing that soon in 2025. But in 2017, they came together to do what was called Made in China 2025. For Xi Jinping, it was a time in which he said it was the rejuvenation of China. At the time, The Economist picked him as the most powerful man in the world. And he came through this with Made in China 2025 as the rejuvenation of China. The idea was to dominate the world in several industries, in medical, in computers, in telecommunications, in electric vehicles, advanced and basic materials, to lead the world in mobile devices, to lead the world industries in agricultural machinery, and to lead the world in robotics. That was the plan. That was the plan put forward in 2017. And the idea was to replace the United States as the world leader economically, and with the Belt and Road Initiative, which followed on, militarily as well. The Belt and Road Initiative was to rebuild the Silk Road. People talk about the Silk Road as being the road from China to Europe. It wasn't just China to Europe. It was a maze. Think of a spider's maze. It wasn't just roads. It covered most of Southeast Asia, and they traded silk. That's how it became known, of course. And The idea was to make the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt was the road was the Silk Road. The road was to cover the sea. The Belt was to cover the entire world. The project of the century. And China was ready to finance it. They wanted to do it in Europe. They wanted to do it in Asia. They wanted to do it in Africa. They wanted to make all roads lead to Beijing. The Silk Road on ice to build across the Arctic Ocean. The digital Silk Road to rule cyberspace. To rule cyberspace. Not to participate, not to be a major player, but to rule cyberspace. And they committed trillions of dollars on infrastructure, roads and railways and ports and power stations. They rebuilt those. Countries like Azerbaijan and Georgia benefited enormously from what money put in. Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, they wanted to strengthen those countries economically to help defend China's western border from Islamic terrorism. And with the cash going into these countries, the idea was you can't question human rights, you can't question corruption, Chinese corruption, you can't question intellectual property, you can't use your own labor, you want to use mostly Chinese laborers. And the idea was the countries would be indebted to China because they were not gifts to China. It was not foreign aid. These were loans. And we know. One example is the port of Hambantota. It was the number 2 port in Sri Lanka. It was dilapidated. It was terrible. They wanted to rebuild it. Sri Lanka saw Hambantota as a port that could be rebuilt and really increase the economic value to shipping from and to Sri Lanka. So the Chinese company negotiated a deal. Sri Lanka guaranteed the debt and the bonds, and the Chinese came in, the Chinese companies came in and rebuilt Hambantota, made it a significant port. And when Sri Lanka could not repay the bonds, those companies repossessed the port. And today, a quarter of the Chinese Navy is anchored in Hambantota. It now belongs to the Chinese. A quarter of the Chinese Navy is there. That was the Belt and Road Initiative. And it's working. Ports in Greece, ports in the Mediterranean, ports in Africa, roads all around. The Belt and the Road Initiative. That was the Chinese outlook. That's how China wanted to dominate economically and militarily, to own the railroads, to own the ports, to have the rights to use all of that, to own cyberspace. We'll talk more about that. And they did. Consider just all the big news coming out. Consider just BYD. BYD is beyond your dreams. It's a car that competes with Tesla, a car that competes with Rivian. A very extremely successful car. Has visual recognition, has so many things. China now has 19.9% of the electronic vehicle market worldwide. Compare that to 10.5% Tesla. At the time in 2025, when 2017 was going, China didn't have electric vehicles. I own a Tesla. I've owned a Tesla since 2015. I owned a Tesla from the time in which there were so few of us that owned Tesla that when you saw another Tesla on the road, you would wave at them and they'd wave back. That was where China had no EVs. Today, they dominate the EV market. That's what they've done. And you can go down the list of medical. They are one of the leaders in synthetic biology. Um, and they're a competitor all worldwide. They're moving into computers and telecommunications, mobile devices, agricultural machinery, and robotics. China is focused and they're achieving some success. So much success that they invited CEOs to China. And the ones who went to China are coming back terrified. According to the UK Telegraph paper out of the UK, the executives who visited China, the CEOs, these are not small company CEOs. Let me read a couple quotes from that article. The Ford's chief executive, Ford Motor Company, chief executive said, "It's the most humbling thing I've ever seen." After visiting a stream of factories, Jim Farley was left astonished by the technical innovation being packed into Chinese cars, from self-driving software to facial recognition. And he's quoted as saying, "Their cost and quality of their vehicles is so far superior to what I see in the West. We're in a global competition with China, and it's not just EVs. If we lose this, we do not have a future at Ford Motor Company. We do not have a future at Ford Motor Company if what he was seeing in terms of EVs." And other executives described in that same article described dark factories where robots do much of the work. The Greg Jackson, the boss of the energy supplier Octopus, CEO, claimed that they went to a factory where the lights weren't on. It was so automated, there were so few people that they didn't even have to turn on the electric lights. Everything was automated and going. The article goes on to say, instead of being focused on low quality products, they're now viewed as a leader in the rapidly growing high value technologies such as electric vehicles, batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, drones, and advanced robotics. That's what they came back from seeing. That's an executive who says the Ford Motor Company may be doomed. Those were the CEOs. And yes, there's a political aspect to it as well. Venture capitalists who went to it, group of top venture capitalists from the worldwide with billions of dollars to spend, they came back and said their visit showed that it was not prudent to invest in Western countries, whether it be Europe or whether it be the United States. It just wasn't worth it. Article from Bloomberg talks about the July road trip, and they visited factories, spoke with startup investors, and interviewed the founders of companies. They knew already when they went that China was racing ahead in batteries and everything around energy, but still, seeing how big a gap was, they really wondered whether North American companies can survive. And we know that Planet A Ventures, a Berlin-based VC, had decided to invest in Western startups covering batteries and recycling, electrolyzers, solar, and hardware for wind. Said those investments that they'd been considering in the West were no longer viable. China was way ahead. They suspected China was going way ahead, and they've simply taken the United States and the West off their list. No investments from Western VCs. Sounds pretty bad, huh? Sounds like China's already succeeded in replacing the United States. Sounds that if that's the case, it's incredibly bad news for the future of the American economy and stock market. If people are investing in China and avoiding the United States, if we're seeing companies go out of business, major companies, Ford Motor Company going out of business because they're put out of business by trade, the question is it really real? Are we in that much trouble? If we're in that much trouble, we're in trouble. And the investments, the stock market is in trouble. But I want to take you back and talk about, is it real? And I want to talk about what happened with Edward Snowden. That's what I call the Snowden Effect. Remember Edward Snowden, 2014? He copied things onto a thumb drive, into a thumb drive, talked about all the NASA or all the NSA's surveillance data, all their information, took all that, and then was going to leave the US on his way to Russia to sell the data, on his way to take advantage of it. That was what he did. China's government went into a panic when that happened. They went into a real panic. By 2014, they wanted to reorganize the internet. They formed a department called the Department of Internet Security Emergency Command Center. They formed another department called the Agency Service Center, and a third one called Illegal and Unhealthy Information Reporting Center. And in charge of that, they put Liu Wei. Liu Wei, until 2016, was head of Beijing Propaganda Department. Beijing Propaganda Department has 60,000 employees in 2016, 60,000 on the payroll, and over 2 million that were contract workers. That's over 2 million propaganda people working on that, either as a contract worker or on the payroll. And under their survey, they put all websites without a single exception. And they required that they use the standard official and authoritative media reports with regards to the detention of troublemaking lawyers by relevant departments. They began a period of censorship. Comments that could not be made on the websites, any comment that harmed national security, any comment that harmed China's honor or interest, any comment that damaged China's religious policies, any comment that spread a rumor, any comment that disturbed the public order, and any comment that intentionally used character combinations to avoid censorship. All of that fell under Liu Wei. And in 2021, they put policies into place to share the data across social media, to share e-commerce, to share across lending and all businesses. And in 2021, they set up the Cyberspace Administration of China with the China Internet Investment Fund. The China Investment Fund was set up with discounted investment of 1% of ownership in all internet-related companies, 130,000 of private and joint venture companies. They were all private companies, a lot of private companies. In 2000, there were 14% of the companies were private. By 2015, 33% were. And it gave the Chinese Internet Investment Fund the right to appoint board members. And their concern was that the companies not fail to control and not run party ideology. Losing money at the companies was not a concern. They didn't care whether they made money or lose money. And one member of the board was appointed by Liu Wei. 60 out of this group of 60,000 who were in the propaganda side, one board member came out of that side. You know, TikTok's been in the news. TikTok was a company or an algorithm that was developed by ByteDance. The founder of ByteDance was Wu Xingang. Um, he was replaced by Ling Rubo, person that had I'm sorry, Zhang Jingming was the founder of ByteDance. He was Wu Shanggang was appointed to the board of directors. He was out of the communist propaganda side, the Chinese propaganda. He had no business background, and they forced the founder to step aside and replaced him by Ling Rubo. That's the Snowden effect. That's happening on the internet side. That's happening with the business sides. A member of the board of directors is coming out of the propaganda side. A member of the board of directors for those companies, BYD and the other companies, is coming out of the propaganda side with the idea of not harming national security, not harming China's honor or interest, not damaging China's religious policies, not spreading rumors, not disturbing the public order, and not intentionally using characters or other ideas. It's all about promoting the Chinese philosophy. It's not about making money and dominating. It's about doing and making China look like made in China 2025 and the Belt and Road Initiative, bringing up the positive talking points without any of the negatives. So I come back to the Potemkin Village. Are we seeing that created in China? Are we seeing just the facades? Are we seeing the reality of what's happening? I use the example of BYD, Beyond Your Dreams Cars. It has had explosive growth. They've had explosive growth because they're selling below invoice. Reminds me of an old joke about the car dealership. And it advertised, we're selling cars below invoice. And somebody says, how can you sell below invoice? And the response is, because we sell in volume. In the case of BYD, they're selling those cars below cost. And how can you do that? By selling in volume. The whole focus is to sell below invoice, to sell below the cost, to do a cost competitive car. And yes, they have a lot of features, some visual recognition. That China has visual recognition everywhere. And that's been incorporated in the cars. A lot of computer stuff operated, self-driving. All that is developed in the cars. The one thing you don't have is China doesn't publish the accidents. If you have a self-driving car in the United States that kills somebody in San Francisco or in Austin or in Pittsburgh, that is huge news, and they shut down the system for a while. In China, if one of those self-driving cars kills 1 or 2 or 5 people, that news is buried. It never makes it out. It's just buried. And you have the engineers looking at how it can be avoided, but they continue to run that way. BYD is running up $350 or $400 billion in debt, and they're financing that. And guess who they're turning to buy those bonds? Guess who they're selling those bonds to? If you look at some of the US pension funds, they own some of those bonds. The Chinese leadership's not dumb. They know if they can convince American funds, VC funds, institutional investors to think that China is way ahead of us and that they should be investing in China and not in the United States, they're selling those bonds. They're selling those bonds. And we have an example in Evergrande, the real estate developer. Remember, China was building all across China, building new cities, financing new buildings and apartments, and selling bonds. And you know who a lot of those bonds were bought by? US institutions, European institutions. Some of the pension funds owned those bonds. Some of the pension funds now own the bonds for BYD and some of the other electronics in their robotics, in their medical equipment. Why not? If you're Chinese, why not let the Americans take the risk of those bonds? Why not? Mm. You know, do you think Ford's considering investing in China after they came back and saw that the Chinese cars are working so much better than the US cars? No, I have no insight into that. But you almost have to think that they certainly would be thinking about that. So in one of my pastimes, when I formed a business in the late 90s, early 2000s, to convert a former Soviet military plant to commercial aviation, the largest employer in the country of Georgia, renamed it, did 13 points they need to do, help convert it away from making the Sukhoi 25 fighter jets, the ones you read about in the war in Ukraine. They're like the A-10 Warthog. And through that process, I got invited to a technology conference by the Russian government. And it's a centralized thing. It was just around the year 2000. There were 300 of us that were invited. We went to a conference in Moscow. Everyone had the headphones so that the presentations made in Russia were actually translated by somebody. So we got to hear the presentations simultaneously in English. And they had a number of speakers. They were talking about Russian technology. The equivalent of the Secretary of Commerce spoke to us and said, the only difference between Russian products and Western products is that in the West, we know how to market the products. But otherwise, everything's the same. The quality is the same. Everything is the same. You can get Russian products for a lot cheaper, and because they don't market as well. That was the whole thought of the technology conference. And people were really impressed by what we saw. It was a 2-day conference, presentation after presentation. I ended up going to and talking to people that had developed a hydrogen-driven car. Pour water in, get the hydrogen, and the car drives. I mean, you don't need to plug it into an electric outlet. This was a hydrogen-driven car. They gave me literature on it. They gave me all the studies that had been done, all those things. I was impressed. The data was impressive. Everything looked so good. But something, having worked in Tbilisi, didn't sit right. So I asked if we could take the information back to the US and have all the data verified in the US. A hydrogen motor. We'd like to send us a hydrogen motor. Well, no. They didn't want to do that because it would be copied. I said, we have NDA, non-disclosure things. We'll sign confidential agreements. If anything is disclosed, any information is copied, anything, you can be sued. And I knew that at Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington, that they'd been working on hydrogen power cars. So I said, I'd like to take it back. I want to contact Western and let them take one of your motors and just verify the results which you say you achieved. Nope, not going to happen. Not going to be. We're now 20 years, 25 years since that time. Have the Russians produced a hydrogen-powered car? Nope. I firmly believe that the data was something that was produced by the Russians and by the inventors and by the founders of that company, but the data wasn't real. Impressive? Really impressive. It was incredible to see what the technology they had. Was it real? I don't believe it. Don't believe at all. We talked about landing gear. They didn't want to give it, they had something that was advanced landing gear for planes. Wanted to bring it back, take it to Boeing? Nope, not at all. They didn't want to do that. Each time I talked to a company, they did not want the results to be tested in the West. Said something. It was really an impressive conference. And I'm sure that there's some people that went away from that conference never thinking about testing, but were ready to invest in Russia, in those companies, put money in. And to the best of my knowledge, I've never seen a single one of those products in the West. Are they produced in Russia? Are they produced in the rest of the world? Are they showing up there? Maybe. I don't know. But I've never seen any of those products here. Not a one. Not a one. That's been 25 years ago. You know, I spent time in Tbilisi seeing what goes on in centralized governments and how things come down. That's my personal background. Do I know about China? I don't know. I don't have any knowledge of what's going on. I wasn't on any of the trips by the VCs or by the CEOs. I didn't get invited there. I can't say for sure. But what I can say is from my past experience, I have huge doubts that what was seen by those CEOs, what was seen by those venture capitalists, may not be real. They really may be a Potemkin Village. And if that money flows that way, it could be like those investors in Evergrande whose bonds have defaulted or been trimmed back, bondholders taking a haircut, or complete default. I think there's a high probability of that happening to those investors. So the question is, why should you care? That's them. Those are institutional investors. Those are VC investors. Those are CEOs of companies. The reason is because China is the second largest economy in the world. It used to be said when the United States was 50% of the world economy, of course, we're now just 25, 20%. Used to be said that when the US sneezed, the world caught cold. It's not so true as anymore, but it is true that something goes wrong in China, it is going to affect us in the US. It's going to affect the global supply chains. It's going to affect consumer prices, commodity prices. Things are going to swing all around. It is going to have an impact. I think it's important to understand. And I believe that China has a propaganda machine going in those companies and in what they do to make us feel in America that they're ahead of us. Are they really ahead of us? That's a huge question in my mind. And that sets where we are in investment wise. If you want investments in China, if you have Chinese stocks, maybe you should stay aware. We don't know yet. I don't know. I've never been to China. I've had contacts with Chinese people just to do a newsletter. I predicted that America would win the war with China when made in China 2025. That actually went to one of the top Chinese people who wrote back. And he didn't write back to me, but one of the people that received my newsletter was a Chinese, American Chinese who had friends and family in China and sent my newsletter to China when I wrote about Made in China 2025 and said, I didn't think that China would win, that America would win. And I got a response back through them to say, I wrote really well, but I was wrong. China was going to win. That was their approach. It's being aware of what's going on in the world, being aware of what's going on for the competition, and being aware that some may be real. I downplayed it all. I've said maybe it's a Potemkin Village, but some is real. Some is really real. And that's important to be aware of as well. Knowing what's real, what's not real, what's a Potemkin Village, and what is real. And it's difficult to know. They're over there, we're over here, and they're not very transparent with what's going on. So that's my thing. Is the Chinese gold really gold? Is the market really that good? Are they really that good? Then the CEO of Ford would be afraid that they're going to shut down China, shut down Ford. Certainly it raises a question, but is it real? So that's it. Next step, schedule a time with me. Let's talk about it. We have a pretty good track record. We've done well over the years. I've shown this, continue to show it. This is how we do compared to the average financial advisor. And of course, we always have to say past performance is no guarantee of future performance. And we have all that. And so with that, questions. What do you have?
Hey, Mike, I'm back. Everybody, I am here. It's Chris Prouty back here with you, and I am here to monitor the Q&A and the chat. And before we get to any questions, I want to let you know into the chat, I just put an offer to get with Mike for a portfolio review. This is not a sales call in disguise. This is just an opportunity to get some personalized feedback from Mike because, as you know, we are here today and this is a general conversation and you are unique. You have a unique financial situation, unique financial goals. So if you'd like to hop on a call with him, all you have to do is send him an email. He answers every email personally. Mike, somebody says, let's see. Somebody says, what warning signs should we be looking for that this, and I'm just paraphrasing what they've asked, what warning signs should we be looking for that China isn't being completely honest?
I don't think there are any warning signs. Chinese companies, the Chinese are not being completely honest, period.
Yeah.
That's not a warning sign. They're not being completely honest. The question is not whether they're being honest. The question is what you're doing in your portfolio. If there are defaults, bond defaults, if there are stock defaults, if there are things that they do, we're seeing just one small piece of it with rare earths. They're they're requiring new documentation, new approvals for rare earths. Are you invested in things that are going to be dependent upon those rare earths materials? Each time they come up with something like that, you should be aware. Are you invested in a company that's going to get impacted by what they do?
Mike, somebody asks if you can talk about the relationship between US tariffs on China and the amount of deception that might be coming out of China.
I'm sure that the deception was going to be there whether we had tariffs or not. The deception has increased dramatically. Those trips in July by the VCs and by the CEOs, those trips have all happened this year after the announcement of tariffs. It's a political game as well as an economic game. And the politics is subject to all the propaganda that's going on.
Mike, it kind of makes me wonder that, as the tariffs come from the US to China, the perception would be, well, we're not going to have as much Chinese product coming into the US. And then China would then respond by saying, well, let us show you how amazing it is here. And let me show you everything you're missing out on. And, as a cold tactic against the the tariffs.
Yeah, you know, the tariffs have upset the world order. And
Yeah.
the things that have gone on with this administration
Yeah.
have upset the world order. Some of it was already going on. I mean, we have gone through a period of time with COVID where we were deglobalization, deglobalization, where we were actually retreating from the supply chains overseas and doing
Hmm.
supply chains. Some of that was well underway before this administration took over. The tariffs have upped the game. And,
Yeah.
you know,
Like
and
Jerry comes to us with the question, what happened to Jack Ma? He he spoke what he actually thought, and ever since he's been under re-education and been under control. What are your thoughts on Jack Ma?
I mean, Jack Ma is going through the same thing I talked about with the Snowden effect. It's all about what you have to do to exist in China. I mean, you can't harm national security. You can't harm China's honor or their interest. You have to align yourself completely with the Chinese government. You can't spread a rumor. You can't spread an opinion, you know, unless it's the Chinese opinion, unless it's one that's been approved by the propagandist that's on your board. Um, you know, and they're these people are not business people. They're politicians. They don't understand business.
Mm-hmm.
Um, story, you know, I got involved with the plant in Tbilisi, Georgia, largest producer, the only producer of the Sukhoi 25 fighter jets. And when the Soviet Union came apart, each of these companies, Aeroflot was split, and so each country got part of it. And this company, this plant, this producer, had the Su-25s, and in a centralized government, the centralized government would say, "We need you to produce 25 of these this year, 50 of these." They produced 925 over the course of time. When I got involved, I call it the Field of Dreams marketing plan. At
Mm.
the time I was involved, they had 19 planes in some state of completion or close to completion, and not one sale had been made. They felt if they build it, people would come. It was what I call the Field of Dreams marketing plan. They're not, you know, they were engineers. They were really good engineers. They were really good at manufacturing what they were doing, but they didn't understand real business and how what needed to happen. That's that's the danger. Anyway,
Mike, we have another question queued up, but before I get to that, two quick things. Robert Williams wants to commiserate with you on the loss. He said he could almost taste the World Series.
uh,
Oh,
thanks, Bobby.
and before we get to the next question into the chat, I've just placed another invitation to get onto Mike's calendar. All you have to do is click on that link, send him a quick email. He will personally respond to your email, and he will answer questions you ask in a no strings attached manner. Mike, somebody's wondering, have you looked into REMX, which is a rare earth ETF?
I haven't. I do individual securities for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I want to know the ins and outs. I want to do the due diligence. We have concentrated portfolios. We have a few stocks that we like, real focused stocks that we think have the potential of not being singles but home runs. Yeah, we want to be the World Series.
Mm-hmm.
In the World Series, you need home runs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, nothing. You know, I'm back to baseball again. I started with baseball. Now I'm back to baseball.
Now you're back to it.
Um, the Dodgers won against Milwaukee. Milwaukee had a team that hit a lot of singles, a whole lot of singles. They got them on, they got them over, they got them in. But when it came to the World Series, competing against that level of competition, it didn't work.
Hmm.
They got swept in 4 games. Yeah, I want to be in the World Series. Anyway,
Mike, continuing with the baseball analogy, you have an away game situation for next week. Would you like to talk to our friends that are here today about what's happening in next week's episode?
next week we're going to do a repeat. Um, it's, I think it's well worth seeing. We're going to put out some emails about what it is. And if you've been here every week, you'll have seen it before, but it's always worth seeing again. It's like going to a really great movie. You want to see it again. I hope that it was really great. And you'll see what's going on.
So, what's going to happen next week? Mike is going to be away and unable to present, but we don't want to take a week off. So, we'll be sending out emails and promoting our weekly episode. I will be here and I'll be here live and we'll just be rebroadcasting one of our most popular episodes. So, watch your emails for that. Mike, another question that's come in: are the tariffs really making a huge difference to U.S. companies? To buy a hold on, I see if I can read this. To buy a buckle in the U.S., it's 50 cents each. With the tariffs, it's still 4 cents per buckle coming from China.
So the tariffs, the idea was that the Chinese would pay for the tariffs. They're not paying for the tariffs. So either companies are eating the cost or they are passing the cost on.
Passing it along.
I did one of the workshops that I did, and you can find it on YouTube. I talked about the prices increasing. You know, Walmart has been increasing the prices significantly more than the tariffs are worth. They're taking advantage of price increases and everybody agreeing to price increases. And maybe the costs are going up. I don't know. But if you look at some of the items that have been targeted at Walmart, some are up 45 to 100%. Some even more than that. So anyway, off the top of my head, I don't remember which workshop that is, but you can go to YouTube, check it out, and find it there.
And for your convenience, I've just put the YouTube link into the chat. So that will allow you to go there. You'll be able to see previous broadcasts and you'll also be able to subscribe to the channel so you get alerts every time we upload a new video.
And
But with
please do
that,
go there. Do go and subscribe.
yeah,
Um, I get more traffic if you subscribe.
yeah, we'll put out more great content.
Yes.
Mike, this is the last call for questions. Anybody that's still here today, we had a nice size audience today, and just looking for any last questions that might come in. Otherwise, we could wrap it up. So, why don't we just give it another second? If you are typing a question and you don't want us to disconnect, you could use the hand raise feature to let me know. I'm keeping an eye on the attendees. Doesn't look like we have anything. Here we go. Mike, we got somebody saying thanks again. Great thoughts. Appreciate that one, Jerry. Thank you very much. And everybody else who's here, keep an eye on your email. We'll send out a note with the rebroadcast link, and we'll also send some invitations to next week. You can come hang out with me next week. I won't be able to answer any questions, but I will take questions and get them to Mike so that he can get those answers to you. Mike, with that, we are wrapped up. Why don't you bring us home? You get the final word.
Well, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And if you do have questions, send them to me by email. You can just respond to the emails you've gotten. I will answer any questions. And of course, I put this slide up because we do very, very well for our clients. So have a great week. Sorry I'm missing you next week, but I will be back in 2 weeks. And the program next week is worth listening to. Take care all.
See you later, Mike.